Hey, it's Niz. This part initially didn't have an intro because I wasn't intending to do this in parts, but since I am, this is a good time to set up a warning. First things first, this part's probably going to have the most spoilers of all the parts because, well, it's a story. And this game is also bloody, gets to swearing at points, and will even cover suicide. If that's all a bit much for you, this is your chance to duck out. Kinda glad I got to do this intro though. This was a great opportunity for me to test out the other mic. And I'm still fiddling with it, trying to make it work, and my voice might sound weird in this. But hopefully I can make it work, and if I do, it'll probably sound better than the one I have right now. Everything outside the intro and bits are probably going to be pre-recorded, so they'll be on the normal mic, but I'd love if you'd let me know which one you prefer, so I could, pick one in the meantime. With that out of the way, you're free to watch the video. In the story of Jimmy and the Pulsating Mask, you play as Jimmy as he travels through the dream realm spending time with his family. The start of the game, he's woken up by his mother Helga with a wake-up song? Well, that's a little bizarre. The song sounds like a lullaby. When I consider something to wake people up, I usually don't think soothing. Yes, I know morning mood exists, but even that type of music is played for when people peacefully wake up. It's not typically used to wake them up. I know I'm really railing on about this, but it's for a good reason. For now, let's move on. You get to meet the rest of Jimmy's family, and on the surface, there's some pretty bare-bones tropes. Buck is the tough, brave bully type, Andrew's the nerd, and Lars is a lazy neckbeard. Helga sends Jimmy and his big brother off to get honey for a cake while she and her husband Andrew have some adult fun time. So Jimmy is sent off on a whimsical adventure to bargain with bees for their honey while Helga and Andrew do taxes. The bees send Jimmy to deal with some goons that are shaking up the place. You take care of the goons and their leader, Punch Tanaka, and they leave. But not before Punch Tanaka gives a very ominous warning about his employer. When you return, something horrible has happened to the hive, and the beasts have become a bunch of shambling, fleshy monstrosities. This includes their queen. Once you defeat the bees, you get the last bit of pristine honey and head home, only to get kidnapped in a spaceship by the goons, a robot that's your grandma, and a dog. Okay, maybe I should slow down to explain this part. The dog is actually this horrible, malicious creature that only seems to want Jimmy's death and to gobble up his brain, which gracefully sidesteps the plot hole of a bad guy being a good boy. Anyway, he bosses around the goons because that dog has some strong intimidation tactics. The reason the grandma is a robot controlling the ship is that in reality his grandmother is actually sick and may have even passed away at this point. She's in this robotic shell to signify how machinery is keeping her alive, but even Jimmy seems to realize this is no way for a person to live. You talk your grandmother to lower insecurity because Jimmy's just such a sweet boy. And when his life is threatened by the dog, she overrides her protocol and sends Jimmy and his family to safety. The only problem is Jimmy and Buck were the only ones together, so the family members in pods are scattered around the world. And now it's up to Jimmy and Buck to reunite their family. You start by going through Legato, a village full of living instruments. The hell? Is the trumpet also alive? Once you overpower the security in Legato Castle, you find Jimmy and Buck's mother, who was mistaken for the kingdom's previously benevolent queen. More importantly, she mentions that she managed to find Jimmy's friend locked away in his closet. Oh, thanks Mom. You mean this closet? Did this not set off any alarms in your head? Also, where was Jonathan in the ship? If he wasn't in the ship, how in the world did he get here from Jimmy's room? The bridge to here was broken at the time. Oh well, he's here now. And that's the least of my concerns about this creepy toy. This is where Jimmy heads through the river as it's the only way forward and you still have a family to find. You encounter the main goons and Punch Tanaka yet again, and on defeating them fall off the bridge. The family manages to make a raft in the water. That's a bit odd, but they survive the fall. And Punch Tanaka is found flailing in the water. You end up saving him. This man just attacked you earlier, but on the other hand, it is Punch Tanaka. Couldn't let this guy drown. He thanks you and sends you a lead to the rest of your family in a small town. But when you reach the bar where they're serving alcohols, before the lead is located, Helga insists to stop to listen to a song, and then murder occurs. An investigation ensues, every character has their own reaction, and Helga insinuates she's aware of the dream world. Jonathan is unfazed by the murder. Boy, you're getting more uncomfortable by the minute. The investigation is just to slow you down, as it turns out nobody in the building is the murderer. When you get the chance to look for your lead, it's already too late. And on heading outside, the dog is in an alleyway prepared to kill you. With no real idea of where to go next, you join Captain Fish in his journey to Grim Echoes, a place where unwanted things are left behind. You find Punch Tanaka lamenting on not being able to find his goons and assuming they left because he was a poor leader. And then the thing that blindsided me the hardest in the game occurs. Helga at this point is starting to suspect Jonathan is a bad bear. She seems to be a bit behind because she's seen the warning signs just now, rather than when they were literal warning signs, and is not telling the bear to get the hell away from her kids before he can encourage anyone else to jump, even though he's very clearly not stopping at Punch. But don't worry, Jimmy knows better. But not even in his dreams is it that easy. As Jonathan burns, he reveals that Jimmy didn't stow him away in his closet out of fear, but out of guilt, as he had shoplifted Jonathan and lied about it being a gift from his grandma. And he made a deal with the Pulsating Mass so that they can be together again. He makes it clear that he'll never allow Jimmy to forget, even as he burns away. You venture on without Jonathan and eventually reach the Ghost Mall. You find a television you can travel through with the powers of the vampire you beat up. It's okay, he was an awful chef and assaulted his customers. You end up in the studio of the Jonathan Bear Show. And as you pass further in, it grows more twisted and grotesque. As do the enemies. I mean, look at Hug Monkey. Some might call him creepy, I call him goofy. Just look at those eyes. He doesn't even resemble a threat. Oh. Well, he's ripped. Probably not the best choice of words here. Oh no. You face Jonathan as this hulking bear, far more intimidating in this form and imbued with the Pulsating Mass. The symbiosis making him significantly more powerful and dangerous. On being defeated, he still yearns to be with Jimmy again, to be the friends they used to be, and attempts to grab him. But Buck knocks Jimmy out of the way in the last second. He is taken instead. You and Helga follow suit down the hall, and both end up in Everchip. A more pixelated world, you manage to find Lars, but he's disguised as a princess to be used as bait for a dragon. Now you have to go deal with the dragon to free Uncle Lars. On freeing Lars and the king's 3 daughters, he declares you a hero, and even gives you a knight name dependent on the most used imagination at the time. But unfortunately, the Pulsating Mass has influence here, and is the king's chancellor. He mind controls the king and convinces him that Jimmy's a criminal and that they have to arrest him and his family. You then have to fight for the king's amusement in the arena. You find the goons and Punch Tanaka, who survived the fall but has suffered memory loss. As you win all the battles, Uncle Lars manages to escape and brings back the dragon and is dropped off just outside of town. Before Jimmy can make it to the meeting point of the dragon after she finishes saving everybody else, he runs into the Pulsating Mass in its Chancellor form, and on its defeat, he states how hollow your victory is before disappearing. Now you can head to Sacred Lantern, where you reunite with your dad and find the goons, minus Tanaka. They reflect on their lives without Punch and how to improve themselves. Punch, even in his amnesiac state, leaves behind scrolls showing that he himself is attempting to find himself, writing several haikus and leaving scrolls behind, and even being so mindful of his bad handwriting that he leaves tapes of him reading them. Andrew tells you the threat that the Pulsating Mass has on the world and insists that you go through an ancient building which tells the prophecy of an ancient knowledge that will ward it off in the world's darkest hour. You then have to venture through the legs of the giant to have reached the library at the top to grab the ancient knowledge. But before you or Andrew can really read it, you run into Buck, who's gone through some drastic changes from the last time you saw him due to the influences of the Pulsating Mass. He tries to stop you and your family, most likely to destroy the ancient knowledge, but before he can, Punch Tanaka shows up, reaching this point from all of his soul searching, with his memory restored. After ranting about himself and giving one more haiku, he says he's realized his real talent in life. Falling from really high places, then he grabs the book and jumps out the hole Buck made. Everyone follows suit. We can definitely take heights out of the list of Jimmy's possible subconscious fears, and Buck leaves you alone, for now. You reunite with Uncle Lars and bond over a game of frisbee on the beach. After a while, you actually go looking for your family again, finding Punch Tanaka, but this time in his frantic flailing in the water, he manages to save himself. Nailed it. You find Andrew shortly after and all band together to find Helga. After going through the fish factory, Andrew decides he'll take time searching out for Helga's location while Jimmy, Lars, and Punch infiltrate the school in town, as the Pulsating Mask got a hold of the book and is posing as a principal at the school. This part of the game is in this form for some reason. I blame Uncle Lars. He probably played a visual novel or two in front of Jimmy. Lars ends up meeting a high school student who's actually a magical girl who protects the moon against the bad students who are undercover aliens that live in the dark side of the moon, and you have to fight them to reach Principal Pulsating Mass's office to get the book. The moon supply is never really explored again, and I am as confused as you are. You then get a lead of where to find Helga, and she's at the very top of the most prestigious building mistaken for the most revered figure in the land. Hold on, we did this already. This time when you reach the top, you face Buck, and on defeating him, Lars and Hitomi, the magical girl, have fallen in love. Lars proposed to her, and they decide to go live a life together on the moon. A bit fast there, Lars. You guys met a week ago and were unofficially dating about 4 floors into this building. So he gets a stepladder out, and leaves. Okay, pause. This is too much for me. I'm not just gonna breeze past this one. I know this is the dream world, but really? Lars, you had a ladder. Why don't we just take that up the building instead of fighting those office workers and security? Damn it. You find Helga and she is reunited with Andrew. You may have noticed a pattern here. Hold on to that thought, we'll get to that. After getting the ancient knowledge and finding Helga, they determine they need to read it at the core of the world, which you have to travel through the subway to reach. Nobody seems to point out that this subway, according to the map, is underwater, which I thought was a missing opportunity for a cooler aesthetic. Getting through the subway does in fact lead to the core, and once you reach it, you are once again stopped by Buck, who is not far behind. The group decides Buck is too powerful to fight, and Punch Tanaka sacrifices himself to buy the family time to escape through the escape pods. The pods launch upward and send them to different planets. Jimmy navigates through the planets and finds Helga and Andrew, and even reunites with Lars and Hitomi, as well as their moon baby. Apparently moon people reproduce super fast. Lars now joins you and you all use Hitomi's ship to return to the main world. She stays behind to build one for herself and Moon Baby. It's at this point of the game where the game really branches out. You have to find 6 artifacts to reopen the core now. Each are in a different area and you can decide which order to tackle them. Once you get all 6, you can return to the core and face Buck. On defeating him, Helga manages to talk him down, although briefly, and his rage knocks them all out. They return to the spot they find Buck when they come to, but the rest of your family has already been grabbed off by the Pulsating Mass. Buck, in defiance against the creature, tears the thing directly out of his spine. Man, Buck, you could have left yourself disabled the best case scenario if it was deep enough. Buck and Jimmy face the Pulsating Mass from the core as it tries to use his family to make him hesitate. But through their victory, Jimmy gains access to the knowledge. He reads it as cloaked figures slowly approach him. He discovers the ancient knowledge, destroys the Pulsating Mass, and his family returns. Everything starts going back to normal and everyone is proud of Jimmy for doing the impossible. I skipped a few details here and there because I wanted to confront them separately from the story. There was stuff in there I wanted to cover too, but I'm doing it here so I wouldn't go too far off track. This is because some of the stuff I have a problem with is pretty long-winded. So let's go back to a few points, because for a while, despite it not making any sense, I thought Helga was in on the plot against Jimmy. I know, it sounds crazy, but hear me out. When you're supposed to find the lead Punch Tanaka leaves behind, she insists that you guys watch the show. It isn't uncharacteristic or anything, but does buy the Pulsating Mass enough time to tie off that loose end. Helga releases the teddy bear, who was very obviously locked away deliberately, and when he insists that Punch jumps and even goes as far as asking if anyone else wants to, saying it looks fun. Helga's response is with slight doubts in the bear, rather than punting him off the bridge as well. Although my suspicion was eased a bit at this point because the bear does conspire against Jimmy's mom, which is odd if they're on the same side. But later on when Buck is kidnapped, when you find her again, she's lying on the ground utterly defeated. Not because her son was kidnapped by a gargantuan monstrosity that is being influenced by a horrific creature that wants only to bring harm to one son, and will go to any lengths to do so even if it includes her other son. A gargantuan monstrosity she released and trusted for far too long, may I add. So this could have easily gone through the self-loathing route. No, she's upset because said beast revealed that Jimmy shoplifted him and lied about it. That's what got her in a funk. This drove me up a wall. Like, she doesn't even care that Buck is in danger. but she does as she jumps down an abyss chasing him, but immediately after she seems to have completely forgotten. I mean that too, I swear on all my marvelous coins, she forgot about Buck. Look, later when you find Andrew, she insists, just outside the legs that hold the ancient knowledge that could save life as we know it, to take a break. And it's been a long time since we spent time together. As a family. Andrew has explained to the family that's here that the thing that captured him is a rapidly growing threat. But Helga insists now would be a great time to visit a tourist trap. Whatever. Andy says it's fine. Maybe waiting a bit longer won't. Alright. This one especially upsets me because if the roles were reversed and Helga was captured, Buck wouldn't rest to hunt her down and save her. I know this because that's exactly what happened the first time she was missing. That also reminds me, on reaching the ancient library on the top, Helga suggests that they leave as there is a skeletal librarian, and she thinks this is an inappropriate place to have their son wandering around. Unlike these places, of course. Well, to be fair, they're not like these places, because we know for fact the ancient library is somewhere we have to go to save the world. Seriously, Helga, why are you so keen on slowing us down at every turn? As it turns out, it wasn't that she was conspiring with the Pulsating Mask, by the way. It's just her carefree nature. Which I think upsets me more because she didn't have a goal for all of this other than to live in the moment. Which I wouldn't mind if the situation wasn't incredibly urgent, or if she did this less often. There's also a bit of the issue where some of the story sort of advances in odd ways, causing you to gain and lose party members very often after boss fights. And a lot of it I could tell was done as a convenience to make it so the party stays at 4 people. Speaking in the realms of gameplay, this was a good decision. This means party members can rejoin at higher levels, so none fall behind. But it also means you have to play with the cards the game deals you until you reach the post-game. Although annoying, I will gladly take this over the countless hours I'd have to spend getting everyone to level 60. Because you need to use each one for the heart prison, and the last thing this game needs is more grinding. But it does lead to a couple of issues in the story where party members end up leaving in ways that don't quite make sense. Some examples include Lars deciding to head off to the moon with his space wife before even saying goodbye to Helga. Seriously, Lars, she's in the next room. Also, has everyone just forgotten about the giant cancer eating the world and possessing Buck? We fought him just now, and Punch Tanaka's sacrifice was ultimately pointless when you think about it. Let me break it down. The escape pods are back here, away from Buck. The ancient knowledge is here, in front of Buck. So you guys can reach the escape pods, but he has this long sacrificial speech just before doing so, and during all of it, my thought process was, wait, what? Punch, just join us. There's so many better ways this could have been done. 1. Establish that there are 3 escape pods. There may have been, I didn't see the 4th on the way in here, but I didn't check. But I also have no reason to assume that there are just 3. If there are 2 on this side, there could have been 2 on the other. Have Punch shove Buck back so that Andrew can grab the ancient knowledge. They still have to get to the core again before they can properly use it. Relocate the escape pods or Buck where he would be in the way, and Punch sacrifices himself so the family can make a mad dash. And none of this is even covering the biggest problem. They talk about Buck being too strong for you to handle. That's the reason you have to run. But you beat Buck earlier, and he's not established as becoming much stronger. What gives? I assume it's because he claimed he was holding back the first time, but now the Pulsating Mass has removed his restraint. But you don't even bother trying to fight him. This felt like it was all done so that you have an excuse to escape, get the ship from Hitomi, and have free roaming in the world to set up for the post-game. But this could have ended here if the story was packed down a bit more and little would have been lost. Make it so you need to get all 6 of these blue orbs before entering the center at all. Make a new excuse for Punch, Tanaka, and Hitomi to leave the party. Maybe get Punch to reunite the goons and revolt against the Pulsating Mass. Say doing this buys you time from being chased. It also creates a redemption arc for all the goons and not just Punch. Hitomi gives Jimmy her ship before joining the goons in the skirmishing. So yeah, there's a lot of parts in the final act that could use a bit of revision story-wise. There's some points of this game that sort of feels like its title, unsubtle and a bit longer than it has to be. The game was about 50 hours long when I was bumbling about trying to find the correct course of action the first time, and 30 hours long when I went through it the second time. Now I might not be a pulsating master, but I feel like I've gotten an adequate grasp on the game, and that's pretty long compared to a lot of RPGs in the realm of RPG Maker. At least the ones I play, as they typically go for a short runtime but with a decent amount of replay value. This game sort of does the opposite, which comes to my second rule. Rule 2. Use all your separate saves for story-driven parts of the game. It's a bit hard to figure out when these parts are before it's too late, but if you are and when you can, use all your separate saves for these parts, and you can fortunately save anywhere. This is important, because these are the only reason you would replay the game, and in my opinion, they're not worth all the trouble, as it takes a decent amount of grinding. Fun grinding in my opinion, as the ideal way to go through is a bunch of optional dungeons and bosses, but to get past all that stuff just to get to the story rather than because you wanting to feels kinda like a chore. So it's best to just sort of use all your saves to bookmark the story related parts of this game, and have 2 extra, one for when you start exploring the post game and one for when you're actually doing it, as there's a lot of stuff that you can only do once. Now that I'm in this department, I'm going to actually talk about the post game. There's a lot to do. You can go down a 100 floor dungeon and fight a demon, fight in the arena for the King of Everchip, and go to an area that was inaccessible until you beat the game called the Heart Prison, where you fight far stronger versions of normal enemies and bosses. And at first I found this very welcoming. I thought it'd be really fun to refight all the bosses except we're on equal footing. The problem is that's not the case. For some of the bosses you hit a block because you're not strong enough to handle them and you'll have to grind. Grimclaw is a good example for when you don't have to grind for at least. You can still beat Grimclaw underleveled with an interrupt focus strategy to make sure he doesn't do that one ability that will drop all your party members in one hit, but enemies like the Black Prophet where you're running on borrowed time, even the most delay efficient comp, it ends up being impossible unless you grind and make sure you can make that damage threshold. And I absolutely despise that. It's not that I don't know what to do, it's that I need to grind to actually do it. Then there's the Dark Dungeon, but I got tired of that after the first 20 floors. It's a real good thing the dungeon has checkpoints every 10 floors, but you have to be lucky in the early part of the game to come up with a ladder, as that's the only way you can leave without losing points. You're stuck on this pattern until you can come up with the item that gives you a permanent ladder. At 100 floors you can face the Dark Demon boss, and I honestly hated it. Not a whole lot of bosses in the game just feel like a brick wall you have to hit over and over until you win or run out of supplies, but the demon is a clear exception. I lost to it after over half an hour of fighting it and trying to whittle it down. I had a team composed in a way that they were effectively dealing with the demon, but since Jimmy's imagination is randomized, you can never really depend on him. And it was just incredibly annoying because I lost with the fact that I ran out of supplies to keep my team up and able to use abilities, rather than being overconfident or having a poor strategy. I forgot to mention to get to this boss I had to go through several locked doors, and to get the keys consists of encounters with multiple enemies that can, by chance, instantly kill a party member. You have to be at least somewhat lucky to reach the boss because you have to unlock 3 doors to reach him, but you only really guarantee going through 2 with the right gear. You could be playing Ring Around the Rosies for quite some time before you get the 3rd one. There's these stones you can get if you make a lot of progress in the game and go through great lengths to achieve them, but they've only unlocked these small animations you already saw previously in the game. And to get access to the room to see them, you have to grind for coins from Mr. Marvelous, but only if you go through the side story where he tries to get his life back together. Hopefully you've done this and already defeated the mini-boss to complete this arc. But then you have to come up with 60 Marvelous coins. There's a way to reliably get 2 every encounter against a specific enemy, but all this effort to watch sprites walk again and maybe do a little dance? Can't say I'm satisfied. This kind of encompasses everything about the post-game. It's all done for its own sake. You're not really getting anything special from it all. It's all there in case you actually want to do it. Don't get me wrong, the Heart Prison was somewhat fun, and I enjoyed the Kingsland Arena. Both allow you to fight a few new enemies you'd never see otherwise, and you get to fight a familiar set of faces. But these fights can only be done once. There's some cool new gear like accessories that not only boost stats but teach new moves when equipped, and ones that empower abilities for certain characters at the cost of longer cooldowns. But these were things you could earn before beating the game. After a while, the post-game felt like a real drag I couldn't recommend unless you're completely fine with grinding even after you've completed the game, or have a bit of luck and a strong grasp of damage multipliers. Either way, both have to be fine with only seeing a bit of new content. Let's go over the stacking. First, you equip a Grandmaster Key from the King's Arena. This will let you always crit, which is free double damage. Bring Andrew along with you and have him use Analysis. The next set of damage that this enemy takes will be tripled. Pretty simple, right? Crit with weak point, do a ton of damage, but doesn't end there. Use Mana Burn to raise your attack power by 50%. Then, you use Called Shot, so the next attack you do deals double damage. Then you use Rampage, which is an attack that stuns you, but your attack deals 500% more damage. You can only deal damage this hefty once, but the Rampage Called Shot combo still hits like a ton of bricks. This combo will take a ton of the boss's health, or immediately drop one of them if it's multiple targets for a boss. This might seem excessive, but this fight's going pretty much nowhere unless you're able to one-shot the healer. You might think that fighting your family in the heart prison might be something insightful or any sort of Easter egg. Not really. In fact, you don't get any reward for completing the heart prison, other than another stone so you can watch them walk in that one room. Sure, there's the optional highest stat increasing gear in the game that's exclusive to whichever character the area is based on, but very often that gear will prioritize damage, even for characters that don't. Stuff like this is why I really wish there was a cap around level 60, and cap out the imaginations at 50 or so. Then make all the bosses in Heart Prison balanced around that, and you could face them as many times as you want. You wouldn't have to worry about some party members falling behind at that point. You wouldn't have to grind, and it really would have given some amusement to really try out every strategy. It would only do good for the game's length and enjoyability. The lack of new content still might be dissatisfying, but the Heart Prison could be its own type of reward for being a playground. But let's pull away from the post-game, because I finally want to talk about the ending. No, not that ending. The singular, true ending. I won't lie, I'm a sucker for animation in RPG Maker games. Even animatics or a well-made picture will draw me into the game more. Just something outside the normal art style. So seeing Jimmy transition from his sprite into an animation so smoothly, usually it's a fade-in for this type of stuff, and how he speaks his first and last words in the game, before it all becomes a flat line, was powerful. I didn't really like the idea that this was a coma story though. This is a bit of a bias of mine, it all being a dream is probably my second least favorite trope of all time. That being because it's really easy to interpret even the most nonsensical thing into something that equates to their real life. Although I sort of saw this coming because Jimmy was in the dream world for far too long without a break where he walks around in reality so that we can compare it to his dreams. Something you see in games like Yume Nikki. Usually if a kid remains in the dream world for the entirety of the game, it won't be 30 plus hours long. It also makes me feel like Helga only sings a song about waking up because the story needed something like that. I was sad when I knew Jimmy was going to die, but I was at peace with it through 2/3 of the game. A child in a dark RPG Maker game might as well go through the stages of grief before the game even ends. I mean, look at these kids, they're screwed. Don't worry, it's not complete spoilers, there's a couple of red herrings in here. But after spending nearly an additional 20 hours completing the optional content, nothing about the game or its ending actually change. Sounds like it would be upsetting, but I can make a case for why I think this is better than a hidden ending. The pulsating mass was never real. Well, it was real. Jimmy does or did have brain cancer, and it was a very real threat, but the pulsating mass is a personified version of it, which is why it was cartoonishly evil and showed unreasonable disdain towards Jimmy. It's his coping mechanism, he doesn't understand how the world works yet. So he asks, why would this happen? Why me? Jimmy's trapped in this fantasy world of his, but here he can pretend to have his victories in the little time he has left. To try to, even if momentarily, escape from the fact that he's ultimately powerless in his bed. This is why the victory text always reads Jimmy did his best. He can't truly win. It's really weird how direct the game is about it. I like how the game doesn't try to suggest it's a dream. It makes it abundantly clear everything is centered around Jimmy. A waiter that never met him knows exactly how he likes his grilled cheese sandwich. Helga, when seeing a murder scene, will ask if Jimmy's been watching horror movies with Buck. The game doesn't treat it like it's a mystery, but then it takes the comatose route and tries to make a mystery out of that, which surprised me when that trope seems even more worn. It's called Jimmy and the Pulsating Mask. There's a heavy emphasis on the brain in the horrific parts of the game, and it spells out that Jimmy's just enjoying hollow victories. Come on, Casey, I could figure some of this out on my own. I'm surprised by how unsettled the game is sometimes, because when it does subtlety, it does it well. After all, why on earth would someone Jimmy's age know what terminal means? Another example is this telescope. You look through it and you see through Jimmy's eyes, even if briefly. He notes that it's still dark out. Well, of course it's dark out, you're asleep. He states it almost as if it's a surprise. But if he's asleep, he's more likely to see night than day, unless he's in bed all day as well and has lost track of time. But that's a hell of a leap, so let's look further. There's a couch over in the corner, which doesn't make much sense. A couch in a bedroom? That couch wasn't there before. Then you see over there what I assume is Jonathan, but that can't be right. If Jimmy's dreams and his guilt is anything to go by, Jonathan is in his closet. So that's either not Jonathan, or someone took him out, like his mother going through his things trying to make his room feel more at home. This room doesn't match Jimmy's in its layout from the position of the bed. The windows are on the left rather than the right. The bed's not even in the corner like it usually is, and while I'm on the bed, what's with the railing? That's not on Jimmy's bed. In fact, I think I've only seen such railing on a hospital bed. This image and statement says so much on its own and can allow so much speculation. Yet it's an optional visual that you can just walk past, and once you leave this part of the game, you never see it again. I love this type of stuff. There's an implication of Jimmy going through chemotherapy later on in the game. In the jack-o'-lantern empathy, it says that Jimmy's mom goes through his stuff after he passed away. She looks at the baseball cap he's been wearing recently. Not like a trusty old cap, something he values dearly, just something he's decided to wear recently, despite Jimmy showing no affinity towards a ball cap in this world. But he does seem to care enough to wear his Jonathan Bear shirt. There's only one scene in the game I could find with it, and it was a memory in the real world. And you can very clearly see that Jimmy is bald in this scene. Stuff like that had me intrigued on how the game conveys information. There's even other stories not related to Jimmy where you'll have to explore around to get the full picture on. I'd hate to spoil them all, so I'll keep quiet about a couple, but some are kind of important to better understand certain characters. Speaking of which, remember when I said the family seemed like a bunch of tropes? Well, the game expands on that going through. Buck is still a tough guy who, despite his lack of emotions towards most things, is often reckless, but that doesn't mean he's callous towards his family. Well, he is a little. When Buck demands that Jimmy gets up after the ship incident no matter how tired he is, he's not doing it because he doesn't care how Jimmy feels, he's doing it because he thinks he needs to get stronger. Buck has shown several times to be tough on Jimmy, not to bully him, but to improve him. He makes sure to challenge him so that he'll grow. It does seem rough considering Jimmy's not even in the double digits of age, but Buck seems to want to make sure Jimmy is safe because he won't always be around. Buck probably doesn't like to show his feelings because he thinks of them as a personal weakness. He's also bad at hiding them, as it's clear he's always concerned about the well-being of Helga. Despite his behavior, Buck is a massive mama's boy. Buck's problem seems to be that he only sees solutions and strength. While Jimmy's in his bed, Buck goes on a rampage in his room out of frustration and tells Jimmy he has to be stronger than this. I called Uncle Lars a lazy neckbeard earlier. That's still true. He lies around, does basically nothing all day, and moved into Helga's after their parents passed away. Lars just doesn't have the drive needed to make something of his life, unless it's over someone he cares about. When someone he loves is in trouble or is emotionally distraught, he'll certainly go out of his way to help them. Lars is just too passive to really do anything without a push. He treats Jimmy well and is probably a big part of Jimmy's wild imagination for the better. Lars is a bit weird, but he is patient. When Jimmy is in the hospital, he's the one who sticks around the longest. Just like when his mother grew ill, it'll be a long time before he leaves his side. Andrew's a bit of a shorter one. I don't know a whole lot about Andrew except he's very focused on the academical success of Jimmy. And that he's a paleontologist, but it took a while for me to figure that one out. Andrew's stance is that every problem has a solution, so when the doctors told him that they had no other choice but to let it run its course and hope for the best when Jimmy was suffering from cancer, he refused to accept that as an answer. In one memory, Jimmy can hear Andrew flipping through pages of a book beside him. He's most likely trying to find a solution himself, refusing to accept not only what's happening to his son, but a problem with no solution. Surely the doctors were looking in the wrong places or not looking hard enough if that was the case. He's so certain about this, he, a paleontologist out of his element, can tell a doctor in his field of expertise with such certainty that he is wrong. Punch Tanaka is by far my favorite non-family member in the game. I first saw his goons shaking people around and committing vandalism, and I assumed they were up to no good, and that their leader was probably Jimmy's bully. Punch Tanaka is a man who not only values his crew, but never holds any ill will towards Jimmy. He seems keen on stopping Jimmy from facing the pulsating mass altogether rather than doing its dirty work. When the three main goons split up and one of them ends up getting caught in an embarrassing situation, he'll ask where that person went, and when he is told they're missing, he has nothing but good things to say about them, stating that the goons are a family. He seems to value friendship over just about anything else, and when Jimmy helps Punch out, he very often goes out of his way, putting his life on the line, to look out for him. He doesn't seem to look down on anyone. He becomes a janitor at one point, stating that it's an underappreciated job. When he's reunited with the goons who have all improved significantly, he doesn't show envy, but pride in all of them. But he denies rejoining the goons as he still needs to help Jimmy. His efforts were as unappreciated as any janitor could be, so in his honor, pompadour flowing, shades reflecting the sunlight, he takes the cold shot. A haiku. Not a lot to say about Hitomi. She shows up once in the party, and it's only for about 3 levels. I guess it's worth mentioning she's the love interest for Lars that inspires him to improve himself. All for the Moon Lady. I didn't forget about Jonathan. I really don't like Jonathan, for obvious reasons. But in the post-game, everyone seems quick to forgive him. He basically says mistakes were made, but I'm still here for you. I don't think he actually apologizes, despite owing half the people in the house a direct apology.
I just wanted to add in an editor's note. The only people he hadn't wronged were people who weren't in the party at the point where he was removed. So it's not out of the question that he would have antagonized every other family member if he had ran into them, as he was already 3 for 3.
I don't think I'm being hard on him. I understand why he did it, but I feel like he's in desperate need to find ways to redeem himself. Because getting screwed over by a friend doesn't justify enabling suicide, conspiring against the kid's mother, then kidnapping his brother after attempting to kidnap him. If it were up to me... Finally, we go over Helga, the character I actually have the most problems with. Helga seems like the hip, happy-go-lucky mom, energetic, and being the shining light of almost everyone's day. The game also heavily insinuates that she's bipolar. There's a lot of hints about Helga having mood swings throughout the game, and it's shown that even Jimmy is aware of this, at least on a subconscious level. But she's always cheerful. The only times she's down throughout the game are very briefly after an awful and traumatic thing happens. But she always bounces back almost immediately, so they're pretty obviously not depressive phases. The first time through, I had a suspicion that this was the message when I went to Rainbow Park, but some of it felt more like she had good and bad days rather than manic and depressive states. She seems really happy here when her son is taking his first steps, but she seems really down now. I didn't think it was because she was getting hit by a depressive phase, I thought it was because her baby wouldn't stop sneezing on her. In all seriousness, it did better conveying her life as a roller coaster than anything else. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe she's not bipolar, but even if this is the case, they bring up her mood swings so often that it's odd they never actually come into play. I really wish they did too, because Helga already slows you down for ridiculous reasons. Like maybe instead of Helga being kidnapped due to a misunderstanding where she looks like a very well known and respected figure that everyone in this part of the world is familiar with again. I think I would have preferred if she was in a depression phase that Andrew spent the week caring for Helga, as it's an especially bad one where she can't get over what happened to Buck. It'd be easy justification for her slowing down the family, put that part of her life into play, and would make Andrew more likable. I'm not gonna lie, I was lukewarm about him. He seems like a good guy, but he's constantly insulting the cool guys on the team, and when they got news about Jimmy, he suggested having another kid. Andrew's very clearly not a social man. You'd have to change a few things, like a new place for Punch to meet his goons after they've improved, and cut out the part of traversing the building, maybe replace it with something else. You could have the Buck fight again, just this time in the core room where you end up meeting him anyway. Then if you win the fight, have him use a powerful move that drops the entire party except Punch, establishing he's too powerful for you to handle right now. But to get back to Helga, she's the loving mother that is the life of the party. Raising 2 kids is not taking an ounce of her energy. She's pretty simple. She sings to Jimmy with a wake-up song while he's asleep, and talks in a way that seems to be her trying to stay in touch with her younger side. Helga wasn't bad, but I don't know why the game brings up the mood swings when it never seems relevant in the actual story. This could have come into play at many points, one of them preferably being to replace the point she suggests a vacation for the family while Buck is kidnapped. No, I'm not letting that go. The good news is that at least Helga's musical prowess comes into play not only in all of her worlds, but we also learn that she sang in a band called Helga and the Phantoms back in college, which is why even when she ditches the career to look after her kids, she sings so often to Jimmy. All in all, she's alright, but I think Helga would have been a lot more interesting if the game brought up her bipolar tendencies more often from Jimmy's perspective. Now that the party's covered, I want to cover a great and not so great character. And I think the Mouse family was certainly one of my favorite parts of the game. There's just enough mystery here to draw you in, and I won't spoil that part because it's worth looking through yourself, but you can see how the Mouse family feels about Timothy leaving to travel the world. And when Timothy realizes that his dad had abandoned their family, he is incredibly upset, and doesn't even need to be confronted on his own actions to wonder to himself how he's any different from him. After all, he left his family behind. But he is different. He writes back to his family and returns in his time of need, giving up the life of adventure to reunite with what matters to him. He proves that he's not the coward he sees his father as. I think Timothy Mouse was a great example of a side character. And on the other side of the spectrum, I think that goes to Information Guy. And at first I kind of felt bad for Information Guy as he's mortally bullied so often. But it didn't seem to bother him and he never seemed to stay dead. But when he started saying stuff like this, well, I started to figure these deaths were doing a number on the poor guy. And it was only a matter of time before he snapped and became an optional boss that either fights you in an attempt to goad you into finding a way to end the cycle, or trying to stop you from achieving the ancient knowledge. Because if you learn everything, he won't be needed anymore, and who knows what will happen to him. Neither were the case. It turns out each Information Guy is their own being. They're a species of short-tailed monkeys that use mimicry to tell you information. They don't actually understand humans. Well, to be fair, this was somewhat hinted at in the Kingsland area, where the Information Guy was just spouting out the same lines he tells you to the guard. But it all seemed ridiculous to me. I get it, it's Jimmy's dreamland, so who even said all this stuff, why they build machines that repeat it, and how they still somehow understand yes and no for a question despite not understanding people, are all irrelevant. Although I find these things all oppose the narrative of them being monkeys with parrot-like tendencies. But ignoring that, the Information Guys still become even more of a joke and a punching bag than before. This reveals they're totally incompetent and can't even grasp the information they're giving. Hell, I don't think they're even sentient. The first time he drops out of nowhere and gives you an understanding of imagination through quirky dialogue before trailing off about his family, all of it was artificial, I guess. Information Guy went from a miserable perpetual to an invasive species. And it makes me really sad to say it because I was growing to like him. If they went about this a little better, he may have been my favorite character. And probably a top tier tutorial character, and I can't get enough of those. The game has some enjoyable side characters, but plenty of forgettable ones too. Most of them have their own side plots, adventures, and optional content. It's nice getting more insight on the characters as the game progresses, despite very often the rewards not being worthwhile. Speaking of things that make an impact, I'm going to dissect some of the visuals and some of the audio of the game, mostly the soundtrack in that regard. Some of the audio in this game does well in details. In the instrumental areas, when an instrument makes the noise that enemies make on their move, they'll play an instrumental version of it instead, matching the instruments they are. There's a lot of music that can set a sense of tranquility, as well as music that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand. There's even a song that's played for the buildup of certain nightmare bosses. and they often do a model job of setting up the mood of the fight. It's also impressive how well nightmares often do their job telling you Jimmy's fears. There's Slither's dungeon representing his claustrophobia as well as his fear of being abducted. The Mines is his arachnophobia. The bosses like Black Prophet and Abyssal are centered around his fear of the inevitable, which would seem like an unrealistic thing for a 9-year-old to think about, but becomes far more of a real fear in Jimmy's position. But unlike the bosses themselves, the boss music lacks variety. I might be spoiled since I'm so used to each boss having their own theme in a lot of games, but a lot of these nightmare bosses share the same theme, as well as a lot of average bosses. Only in the Everchip area do the bosses have a variation of the themes. And only 2 bosses in the game have their own theme. They are reoccurring bosses, but one you fight 3 times and the other you fight twice. So in the boss fight department, the soundtrack is somewhat lacking. But that's not the only place. The Goons definitely needed their own theme. Sharing one with Information Guy of all people was a mistake. This just seems silly. What's here will often sound odd. But the good parts are well thought out and cleverly titled. The home has its own warm theme, but when you return to it at a point where something seems wrong, the music also doesn't quite sound right. It's a different, incomplete, and far more eerie version, which is absolutely appropriate for the situation. The titles differ slightly as well, and said small differences between the two on their own is enough to be a potential spoiler. It's just a real shame the bosses get their own dungeon that has its own music, and many of them have their own intros, but they don't have their own boss themes. Most of them don't even seem to have their own variation. Some do indeed have multiple sprites based on phases, which is great, but some miss that luxury when they should definitely have it, like the Mad Queen. She switches between suits which have completely different strategies, but her sprite remains the same. I'm not asking for anything extravagant, but I'd like if her suit would change based off the phase she's in. This also helps you remember the patterns and behaviors of each phase, as well as keep track of which one she's on. But back on the things I love, the way just about every weapon has its own attack animation, that's an especially nice touch that makes the weapons more immediately recognizable without even looking at them through your inventory. The design of the dungeons, the bosses, as well as making actual interesting common enemies like the metronomes allows it to stand out as a worthwhile experience. But also it feels like some parts of the game could use a little extra. This sleeping dragon in the same part of the game as the metronomes doesn't even have an awake sprite. Some more boss themes and a few more sprite variants on the same enemy, and this game could have went from good to amazing in the visuals and music. I also really wish the post-game looked more different from the game right before you win. In the credits, Smiles renamed Elsim. You see the central hub completely clean, and the hive is in perfect condition. None of these things are in the post-game, as if it was all undone right after the credits. Still, props for having credits change based on how far you progress in each side story. I feel like this would have been nice for adding some interactions to the world that you won't get in regular content. So this all comes down to my final verdict. Initially I was gonna say wait until a sale to pick this one up, but I can't on good faith recommend it like that, in both a good and bad way. The good is that this is an interesting experience just from the random encounters alone. Thanks to how a lot of the abilities as well as the imagination system are percentage based, you won't have to worry too much about one ideal strategy falling off. The game can be pretty straightforward, but there's also a lot to it if you're willing to experiment, like damage multiplier stacking, the ideal use of characters' passives, gimmick weapons, armors, and trinkets that can lead to builds like Luckbuck or Mandrew, the imagination builds, and even small stuff like how trinket stat boosts are different to Jimmy compared to everyone else. The game has a ton of exploration and optional content, but it's also highly recommended optional content, as trying to get through the game otherwise is going to require grinding in the same spot over and over. While exploring, you grind a bit less and get to fight bosses for a ton of XP and some helpful gear. As of recording this, I've played the game for over 100 hours, but a lot of that time can be explained by me having to replay the game again after trying to gather footage. You could fairly easily complete most if not all of the content in 50 hours. This is including post-game. 30-ish if you're only feeling like completing the game and calling it quits after that. but you may want to keep a walkthrough on standby as there are a couple places that progress the story that are easy to get lost in. If you have the patience for a more traditional amount of time spent on an RPG, you'll get your money's worth in completing the game time-wise. I like to hold the standard that time spent is important, but what's just as important is how much of that time you actually enjoy. Some enemy encounters are frustrating as your tank is at the mercy of RNG. Exploration can be just as punishing as it is fun. Experimenting with loadouts, characters, and clubhouse sets in the post-game is entertaining on its own, but the game lacks replay value. Once you complete challenges, you can't refight most of them after that. You can only face most bosses a second time if they get a Heart Prison appearance. And I really mean a second time, because there's only one rematch, so the post-game eventually runs out of content. And with the lack of a new game plus, you're eventually going to run out of things to do. To be fair, it does fit the narrative, but it also makes the game a very one and done deal. I've enjoyed most of the side content, but would not play this game again for a while unless I had to, and I sort of did. So if you're worried you're not going to get your money's worth out of this game, that's not what you'll have to worry about. This game allows a lot of experimentation, strategies, and exploration. Just don't expect to replay it anytime soon. And despite spending so much time in it, I was wanting more, as a lot of the difficult post-game content is not only non-repeatable, but anticlimactic. It's definitely one of those games you probably won't touch again until nearly a year later. The post-game is pretty fun, but you're not going to gain any additional insight on the story from it, and it still encourages grinding, so it was a disappointment in some ways. I'd recommend it for those patient enough to go through the major parts as well as indulge in the side content, as it'll be a much smoother experience if you're willing to do so. Going through the design of the dungeons was really cool, but may lose its novelty after multiple playthroughs. Some dungeons actually lose difficulty from knowing what will happen and where. If you're looking for a short and sweet experience you can consider replaying next week, this is not the right place. But you are absolutely going to get your money's worth in playtime. And if you don't mind a bit of trial and error exploring, this game won't give you too much trouble. The story, although predictable, has a few endearing faces and tales that make it worthwhile. The gameplay is engaging, the soundtrack could be a bit bigger, but does well with what it has. And despite it feeling like it needs more, it's far from a small soundtrack. In the end, the real question is how much you're willing to go through and explore. And with that, this concludes my review of Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice day. Be safe.